Hello, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Good to see you. Good to talk to you. Always a pleasure to have an evening conversation with all of my friends here on YouTube. Welcome. Glad you're here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Be sure to hit the notifications bell so that you find out the next time we have one of these great live discussions. I'm glad that you are all here. I've got an interesting program for you. First of all, if you haven't had the chance, now is the time to go back and watch the web conference the Center for Political Innovation had last night. It was great. Great presentation by Justin Simons. Great presentation by Dust James. Great presentation from Gavin of Students and Youth for a New America. Great music from a good friend of mine named Paul. Great music from Max the Sax. It was just all around great. Twink Rev, Gian, and Sam gave a great MC introduction remarks. That was great. It was just a great web conference all around. Thanks for everyone who helped out. If you want to help us, we're going to have one per month. We're going to have one again next month. So if you want to be involved in the planning of these conversations, of these web conferences, just send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com, and I will be happy to plug you in. We're going to build the Center for Political Innovation, a new socialist think tank. It was a tremendous evening, tremendous interactions, great web conference, music, speeches, and whatnot. And actually tonight, before our roll call, I give my normal opening remarks. I'm going to give just some commentary on a few new events that have happened, not anything big. And then I'm actually going to read to you all. I'm going to read to you all the lyrics from an English ballad from centuries ago, and that should be entertaining. I think that'll be a fun cultural break for us. We'll have a dramatic reading of the lyrics from a quite dramatic and, dare I say, R-rated ballad from the 1700s and probably earlier. So that'll be most of the keynote presentation for tonight. Will be me reading from this long forgotten ballad from the 1800s, not from the 1800s, from the 1700s, and most likely from the 1400s, because many versions of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That'll be later. A couple news items I just wanted to share with you all. So a former MSNBC producer has come out and said that Andrew Yang was blacklisted by MSNBC. They were specifically instructed not to interview Andrew Yang. That is big. MSNBC, as many people like to call it, MSDNC, the mainstream Democratic Party voice, the TV network that seems to push the Democratic Party centrist line, the Russiagate conspiracy theory, the Rachel Maddow network. This election fraud stuff is wrong. Okay, well, that's great. Glad to hear it, Joseph. I'll talk about that, actually, because, I have said things that are a little more nuanced, but thanks, Joseph. Election fraud allegations, I'll say, right? Because I speak to that. I have a nuanced position on this because I like to examine all sides, and I will give a response to that during the discussion period. I've said it many times before, but if you haven't heard me say it, I'll say it once again. So thank you, and keep the super chats rolling in, folks. I will happily answer your super chats after we do our roll call. I will happily answer your super chat questions. So now we do know that it is a fact that Andrew Yang was, basically blacklisted by MSDNC. Another interesting thing that we should be aware of is that in Guatemala, there is a huge rebellion. Kissinger, Biden, détente. There is There is kind of a rebellion going on in Guatemala right now against the budget cuts. The people are in revolt, and that is very, very exciting. Take a look at what's going on in Guatemala. It seems like an anti-austerity rebellion. We know that the whole region has been suffering as the result of a hurricane. We know the Sandinistas and the government of Nicaragua, the socialist government, has stepped up to the plate and done some pretty dramatic things to try and help the people. Meanwhile, Honduras, Guatemala, there has been some real mismanagement. So a big austerity rebellion. People were in the streets burning things. That was pretty exciting to see what's going on in Guatemala right now. In 1953, let's remember that Guatemala had a socialist president named Jacobo Arbenz, and he was a social democrat. He legalized the Communist Party. He carried out some nationalizations, and the CIA overthrew him in 1954. There was a coup d'etat, and the military overthrew the government of Guatemala. We also know that in the 1980s, the United States supported the military of Guatemala, once again overthrowing the elected government and installing Rios Montt as the military dictator. And Rios Montt then conducted genocide against indigenous people in the countryside, backed by the United States. Rios Montt was an evangelical, religious fanatic. He had been trained at the School of the Americas by the CIA, and that he engaged in horrendous crimes against humanity, all backed by the United States, loved by Ronald Reagan. Mafia controlling government and FBI. Mafia, FBI, CIA, and Thailand. Alrighty. Keep them rolling in, folks. Happy to answer your super chat questions, as always. So that's the situation going on there in Guatemala. That is quite dramatic and exciting. Also, the Clear Skies Agreement, which was a key agreement that ended, was part of the situation at the end of the Cold War. We had the Clear Skies Agreement, in which Russia and the United States have the right to monitor each other from the skies. The Clear Skies Agreement is history. So yet another nuclear arms race ending treaty that has been ripped up by the Trump administration. They tell us that Donald Trump is an agent of Russia. But yet the Trump administration, as you'll notice, has escalated international tensions with Russia by ripping up nuclear agreements, ripping up treaties with Russia, escalating the arms race, sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. So I don't know where these people get this, that Trump is an agent of Russia, because he is escalating international tensions. So that is particularly disturbing to see yet another agreement fade away and disappear. Very disturbing. Very, very, very disturbing. What else? What else is new, folks? Anything else that I might want to touch on before I get to our cultural break? Anything else to touch on? I don't think so. COVID is still wreaking havoc on the country and our economy. Max here, what are some things you think socialism with American characteristics will be different than other socialisms? All right, very good question, Max. Socialism with American characteristics different. All righty. Thank you very much, Max. I guess on that note, why don't we jump into our cultural break? So, folks, I first heard this ballad when I was a child. My parents really liked folk music and folk arts, wood carving, storytelling, etc. So, long story short, I ended up at some kind of folk art performance place, and I remember being a small child and hearing a man playing a harp perform this old English ballad. And I was quite a small child, and I was quite disturbed by this English ballad, as it is a little bit disturbing. But I recently decided I would look up the lyrics to this old English ballad that I heard when I was a small child. And I wanted to mention, folks, I have long been a critic of the way rap music is demonized. Right? I'm not a big fan of rap music. I mean, it's just not the type of music I listen to. But it has clearly been unfairly demonized. People say, oh, rap music is full of violence and sex. Rap music is so extreme. Rap music encourages young people to become criminals. Well, I'm sorry, but if you look at working class music throughout history, it shares common themes: criminality, sex, betrayal, violence. This is common. I've often used the example of the Irish ballad, one of my favorite Irish ballads, "Whiskey in the Jar," right? Right. I don't know if folks know the song "Whiskey in the Jar," but look it up. It's a great song. But is it clean? Well, no. Listen to the lyrics of "Whiskey in the Jar." Right. "Whiskey in the Jar" talks about a highway robber who robs a military captain, and then is betrayed by his girlfriend, who puts water into his guns. So when they come to arrest him for robbing the military captain, he can't shoot the police who come to arrest him, so he goes to jail. But he's very excited about his brother breaking him out of jail. And the song "Whiskey in the Jar," which is a great song, the chorus is all about drinking alcohol. Now, it was redone by Thin Lizzy. They changed the lyrics a little bit. They made it kind of a more mellow kind of song. But the actual lyrics to "Whiskey in the Jar," which is a great old traditional Irish song, are about criminality, betrayal, breaking people out of jail. And the chorus is about drinking lots and lots of alcohol. So people who go after rap music and say rap music is evil, now come on, right? Some of the themes that people don't like in rap music have been in music for centuries. Traditional Irish music, especially Irish rebel music, tends to have a lot of the same themes. But there is this song. I'm not going to make any attempt to sing it for you. I'm simply going to read you the lyrics. The lyrics, I will let you know, are very, very long. And they go on for quite some time. And trigger warning. I mean, big, big trigger warning. This poem, lyrics, ballad I'm about to read you is pretty R-rated. It's pretty R-rated. So trigger warning, violence, sex, betrayal, misogyny. It's pretty intense what I'm about to read you. This song is called "The Death of Young Andrew." And it is extremely old. It's one of the Child's Ballads. So in the 1700s, Francis James Childs went through Scotland and Britain, Scotland and England, right? Scotland is in Britain, but he went through Scotland and England, compiling the traditional songs among the people. And he compiled, many, many old ballads that had been around for a long time. And one of them he found is called "Young Andrew." And there are many versions of "Young Andrew" out there. It's a very, very long song. And apparently it's much older than the 1700s, because apparently before it was in English, it was in German. It was in German centuries before it was in English. And on top of that, there is a Gaelic version of it as well. So "The Death of Young Andrew." I am going to recite you the lyrics to "The Death of Young Andrew." And let me warn you, not for the squeamish, not for the childish, but in a way, there's a beauty to it, right? It's a very sad story. And I'm actually going to, at the end, reference to you, who, I think it has some similarities to some current events. You may not see it for a while, but I'm going to end by dedicating it to a certain individual who's been in the headlines lately, and I think you'll know who it's going to be. So if you're not ready for me reciting a long bit of lyrics, some long lyrics from a very long, very, very dark and very, very violent and sexual ballad, please go elsewhere. You've had your trigger warning. And on that note, I'm going to entertain you with what was a very well-known and popular song in the 1700s. All right? Be ready? Here goes. A dramatic reading. "The Death of Young Andrew," a pop song from the 1780s. As I lay in my bed asleep, a dreadful draught in my mind I drew, for I dreamed of a lady and her young man, and he was known as young Andrew. The moon shone bright, and it cast fair light. Welcome, says she, my honey, my sweet, for I have loved thee 7 long years, and now at last we've chanced to meet. And then he took her in his arms, and kissed her on both cheek and chin, and twice or thrice he pleasured her, before the two must part again. Says she, good sir, you've had your will. You can demand no more of me. Remember what you said before, take me to church and marry me. Fair maid, I can't do as I would, but my sweet love, if you love me, go and fetch your father's gold, and I'll go to the church and marry thee. This lady's gone to her father's hall, as well she knew where his gold lay. She counted out 500 pounds, and back to her love she went away. This lady's gone to her father's hall. Oh, I already read that. Then she gave it all to young Andrew, with chains and jewels no gold could buy. Then he took her by the lily-white hand and led her up to a hill so high. She wore a gown of velvet black, a pitiful sight as ye shall see. Take off your velvet gown, for no foot further you'll go with me. She took off her gown of velvet black. Full many a salt of tears she cried. She did cry. And in a robe of finest silk, she stood before young Andrew's eye. Take off your silken robe. Your finery shall go with me. I'll take it for my lady fair, who I love more than I love thee. Then she took off her silken robe. Full many a salt a tear she did cry. In a petticoat of scarlet red, she stood before young Andrew's eye. Take off your petticoat, for even that shall go with me. I'll take it for my lady fair, where she does dwell in a far country. She says, remember, young Andrew, that you were once of woman born, and for that child that Mary bore, please let me keep my petticoat on. O fair lady, I know it well, that I was once of woman born, yet for no child that Mary bore will I let you keep your petticoat on. And then he pulled forth a Scottish sword, and held it in his right hand, and says, will you die on my sword's point, or go naked back home again? My father is a right good earl, as any in this country, and if he your body takes, it'll flower on a gallows tree. And I have 7 brothers, she says, all hardy men and bold are they, and if they your body take, you'll never see another day. Though your father is a right good earl, and any in this whole country, he shall never my body take. I'll fly so fast across the sea. Though you have 7 brothers, he says, and hardy men and bold they are, they never shall my body take. Across the hills I'll fly away. This lady's gone to her father's hall, where every one their rest did take. All but the earl, her father dear, who lay awake for his daughter's sake. And she stood there naked at the door. Who's there? Her father called within. It is your daughter Helen, she cries. I pray you rise and let me in. But up and spoke her father dear. No, I'll not rise and let you in. You'll never enter through that door till you bring back my gold again. Oh, father dear, your gold is gone. I cannot bring it back again. Then naked you came into this world, and naked you'll return again. So she stood there quaking on the ground, until her heart it burst in three, and in the morning she was found, stone cold dead, beneath a tree. And when her father, he got up, this pitiful sight that he might spy, his naked daughter lying dead, the salt tears trickled from his eye. I set so much store by my gold, and now my daughter's lost today. Like flowers fading in the frost, this poor old man would waste away. And they have sworn a solemn oath, and they have sworn by earth and sky, that they will take this young Andrew, that he would wish for the day he died. These 7 brothers then rose up and chased young Andrew into Wales. They caught him there by such a wile, he'll tell no more such lying tales. For there he stood, this young Andrew, like any fox they ringed him round, crying, we've not come for our father, but for the sister you've done down. The 2 of them, they broke his legs, and the 2 of them broke his collarbone, and 2 of them broke his 2 arms, and then leaned him back against a stone. And up and rose the eldest one, saying, see the pity we show thee, for you ne'er shed our sister's blood, so we'll not do that unto thee. And they took up their father's gold, and they laid it out in young Andrew's sight, saying, guard this well, you young Andrew, defend it well from the wolves tonight. And then they left this young Andrew, as naked as the day he's born, saying, men will strip you to the skin, but wolves will strip you to the bone. And they left young Andrew there for dead. Full soon a wolf scented his smell, and she came roaring like a bear, and gaping like a fiend of hell. She finished what the men began. When young Andrew at last had died, the hungry wolf devoured him, the earl's gold lying by his side. And that was a popular song back in the 1780s, The Death of Young Andrew. And I would like to dedicate The Death of Young Andrew to Keith Raniere. Think about that. They've had them in every age. In every age, they've had their Keith Ranieres. So, on that note, folks, thank you for sitting through that epic of Old English epic violence and pornographic, naked, freezing people to death, vengeance, torture, wolves eating people, violent, epic ballad from the 1780s. Thanks for sitting there. That was certainly a dramatic poem. Anyway, folks, I'm glad you're here with me. We've already got a few super chats. So on that note, why don't we do our roll call? I know it's a little bit early, but I'm not going to go that late tonight. So why don't we do our roll call? So names and locations: Max the Saxon, Virginia; Henderson, Nevada; Georgia; Mississippi, JT24; Queens, New York City; David in Italy; Long Island, New York; Willis, Long Island, Mississippi; Keith from Connecticut; Mo from Toronto; Sam Levin in Los Angeles; Billings, Montana; San Jose; Brian Schaefer in Illinois; Albany, New York; Bonn, Germany; New Delhi; Buffalo, New York; Brian Jakowski; Clyde Bank; Tom, Pennsylvania; Cameron, New Haven, Connecticut; John in the Upper West Side of Manhattan; Ithaca, New York; Tommy Ferras in Sicily; Austin, Texas; Humboldt County, Nevada; Dan Brito, BreadTube's going to have a field day, oh boy; Melbourne, Florida; Iran, the Kimya; Frank in Baltimore; Albany, New York; PA, USA; interlocutor, Sonoma, California, Auckland, New Zealand, Kieran from San Diego, California, Don from Fee, which is a small town in Denmark, visiting from St. Louis, Missouri, Florida, Brooklyn, New York City, from the Alberta, Canada, Serbia, Albany, G'day, Northern California, Kendall in San Diego, West Virginia, Alex, Leipzig, East Germany, Albany, up here, upstate Raider, Melbourne, Australia, Freebird, Norway, Bay Area, California, very good. St. Bermuda's checking in. Patrick in Los Angeles, very, very good. United Snakes, Space Communist. Mohsin from Iran, Alex in Salem, Oregon, Rio de Janeiro, Wilmington, Delaware, welcome, welcome, welcome. Auckland, New Zealand, Northern Michigan, Tampa, Florida, Herb Bryant. Very good, very, very good. Glad you're with us. Naples, Florida, Harold Sullivan is with us. Very, very good, very, very good. Missouri via Northern California, very good. Chongqing, China, very good. Salem, Oregon is with us tonight, very good. Glad to have you with us. North Las Vegas is with us tonight, very good. Glad to have you. Always a pleasure. Folks, if you're just joining us now, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Names and locations. We'll keep doing our roll call. Virginia. CPI conference was great, says Will Lotz. Great. Joe and Rose in occupied Northern Ireland. Glad you're here. Love the second CPI meeting, says Harold Sullivan. Well, I loved doing it. They're great. The music, the speeches, everything was tremendous. We're going to do one per month while this gosh darn pandemic is still continuing. So as long as there's a pandemic on, we're going to keep doing them one per month. Youngstown, Ohio, Harold Burt, Chester County, Pennsylvania, Joseph Ballin, right? London, early morning hours. Very good, very, very good. Anyone else? Upstate Raider. Anybody else with us tonight? Nassau County, Char Darling, New York. Very good. I remember Nassau County, right? I think I had a friend out in Syosset at one point. Clarksville, Tennessee. Very good. Glad you're with us. Glad you are with us. All right, folks. I guess before we get into the super chat questions, I will make clear the reason I dedicated the death of young Andrew to Keith Raniere is because I think that Keith Raniere is kind of a similar figure to young Andrew, right? He manipulates young women to get their family's money. He then betrays them and mistreats them, and he goes and does this for a little while until society kind of, has had enough of him, and he goes to prison for a long time. And I guess in young Andrew's case, you read about how they got their revenge on young Andrew. But I think that, this young Andrew character that's in that poem I just read you is very similar to Keith Raniere. I mean, he's the NXIVM guy of the 1700s or the 1400s, I guess. That's kind of why I made that point. Because I mean, when I thought of young Andrew, right? I mean, it's a similar kind of thing, right? I mean, the poem begins, as you heard, with him, he's seducing this young woman and, telling her that he loves her, and then manipulating her to steal her father's gold, as you heard. Thoughts on the film's Death of Stalin and Downfall. Death of Stalin. Downfall. He's manipulating her to steal her father's gold. He then steals all her clothing and leaves her in the woods naked. She then runs to try and get to warmth, and she freezes to death. The father feels devastated, and then the brothers go and get their revenge. And it's quite a bloody story, right? And this is one thing, it's like there is like a racist edge to some of the criticisms of music that you hear. A lot of very conservative folks have it in their mind that everything that white people do is just wholesome and kind, and there's no violence, and there's no killing, and we're civilized, and it's other cultures that are barbaric and primitive and do all this awful stuff. Well, I just read you a very, very, very popular song that was one of the Child's ballads that Francis James Childs compiled in 1789, and it is full of barbaric, ugly, killing, torture, manipulation, sex. I mean, I think in the third stanza he's having sex with her, and torturing her. I mean, it's some intense stuff. And finally, the wolves eating them at the end. I mean, that's pretty intense. Feeding people to wolves is pretty gruesome, says Harold Sullivan. Exactly. So, I thought of this old English piece that I heard when I heard it performed by the harpist, right, at a folk gathering. I heard it performed by a harpist. I was a small child. I was rather disturbed by the content. It was a bit much for me to listen to as a young child. And I know why I was disturbed. I think there's plenty of people that are probably disturbed by it now. I mean, it's a particularly dark piece of writing about a very evil, manipulative man, young Andrew, that is getting his comeuppance. I mean, I think people probably like that it has rough justice in it, right? People think about, a lot of people talk about, right, the Odyssey, right, and the way that Odysseus takes care of the suitors who are trying to marry his wife in his absence, right, and it's particularly bloody and gruesome and violent. And that kind of, vigilantism, rough justice, that's something that seems to be a theme in a lot of art from older times. It seems like the hero being wronged and then going and extracting revenge from those who have wronged him. That seems to be a very common theme in like old ballads and old poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and such. And again, it's pretty barbaric, right? But there you go. Someone's comparing it to Mad Max, the Mel Gibson movie. So there you go. All right. Well, folks, I am going to jump into your super chat questions at this point. Not a long show tonight. Usually I go on for like an hour in my opening remarks. Tonight, not so much. We did our roll call already. But hey, keep the super chats coming. I will answer them as they come. And, and then we'll have our show. I'm glad I could check in with you. It is Sunday night. We all have got work in the morning. New York City might be shut down pretty soon, unfortunately, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But yeah. So on that note, folks, let's jump into it. So the first super chat question I received was about election fraud allegations. I believe the person's name was John. They were saying the election fraud allegations are BS. Well, this super chat was censored by the Google moderation team. All right, Dan. Well, I can't read your question because you it was censored. Thanks, Dan. Election fraud allegations. Here's the thing. I think the Trump camp has done a pretty good job of showing that there were some instances that some questionable, shady, irregular things happened. And I don't think that is wrong to say. I think that in every election, there are shady, questionable, irregular things that happen. However, what the Trump folks don't understand is that the election is not a football game. The election is not writing a paper in high school. Look, in a football game, if you discover that one side is cheating, the other side wins by default. In high school, if you plagiarize your paper, you get a 0. However, the elections are not a football game. They're not. They're not a football game, right? And just because you show that some Democrats somewhere did something irregular, there's some votes that maybe were fixed or something like that, that's not enough to say Trump should win. Trump and Trump supporters think that Trump won because they showed that this happened here, this happened there. No, in order to convince us that Trump won, I mean, we're talking about millions of votes here, okay? And that's not how this stuff works. Did some foul play go on? For example, great example of some foul play that went on in Nevada. In Nevada, there was something called the Native Voter Project. Nevada Native Voter Project, where They were doing something that is illegal, which is encouraging Native Americans to vote by offering, like raffling off $500 gift cards, raffling off pieces of art. That's not legal, right? You cannot be rewarding people to vote. But there was this nonprofit in Nevada that was encouraging people of a specific ethnic group, Native Americans, a specific ethnic group that happens to vote Democratic very consistently, was pulling out all the stops to get Native Americans to the polls, right? I mean, that's not legal, right? You're not allowed to, they had this thing. You can look at my story I did about it. You can read about it, the Nevada Native Voter Project, where Native Americans were being given incentives to vote, like cash gift cards, rare works of art and stuff. That's not legal. However, does that mean that the votes of those Native people whose name got entered in a raffle for $500 automatically get thrown out? Of course not, right? You can't throw out their votes, right? And it's not like they were directly given the card to vote. Their name was entered in a raffle to win it, right? So, and they weren't told who to vote for, mind you. It was just to encourage voter turnout among Native Americans. Well, that's shady activity, right? The person who started the Nevada Native Voter Project may very well be in violation of federal and local laws, because you cannot offer people rewards to vote. You cannot offer people cash incentives to go vote, right? You can't say, oh, if you vote, I'm going to enter you in a drawing to win a $500 gift card. The way it looks to me, that's not legal. But that doesn't mean Trump won, right? That doesn't mean you can't discount the person's vote because their name was entered in a raffle. You can't do that, right? I mean, and that's the thing. Every Native American registered voter's name was entered in this raffle, I believe. And so, you can't, or what, are we going to throw out all the Native American registered votes in Nevada just because of this nefarious activity? No. I think whoever did, the program is legally liable, but, does that deflect the election to Trump? No, it doesn't. You can't throw out people's votes because of that. Is it shady and probably illegal? Yes, but doesn't result in Trump winning. And, there are many examples of this. Okay, a dead person voted in this state. A dead person voted. Not enough. There were dead people who voted here in New York City. There were actually a few people arrested on Election Day. There were a few people arrested on Election Day here in New York City for trying to vote illegally. Now, does that mean that the Republicans automatically won the race? No, right? That's not how it works, right? And that an election, it's not a football game where, one side's cheating, the other side wins by default. No. The same for the election, in high school, right? I mean, I talk in high school, right? You write a paper, oh, you cheated, you're going to get a 0. Well, you don't automatically lose an election if they prove somebody on your side cheated. They just don't do that, right? And to be honest, if you look into the cases, there is, and this is what I don't particularly appreciate, okay? Election foolishness has gone on in the United States since the United States was founded, okay? And, every country in the world that has elections has some shady activities. And the job of the government is to not allow the shady activities to go on, to regulate and stop that. But any election you have, you're going to have people doing things they should not be doing. Great example. Should MLs in imperialist countries wish for imperialist countries to collapse? Okay. You're going to have, in any country, you're going to have shady things that happen. You're going to have irregularities in your election, right? That's going to happen in any country where you have a vote, where you have an election. It's going to happen. Does that mean the results are not valid? No. You'll remember the reason the coup happened in Bolivia was because there were some irregularities in the election in which Evo Morales won. However, those irregularities detected by the Organization for American States were not enough to have changed the election results. But, the U.S. media and the coup was carried out on the basis of, oh, there were some irregularities. They wouldn't have affected the results. Similar things happen around the world where, okay, something went on here. That does not mean, though, that the candidate who won is not the candidate that got the majority of the votes. It means that something shady went on. The Trump camp is playing this game where, okay, we found a bunch of allegations of fraud. Some of them might be legitimate. Some of them might not be. Some of them are just people signing affidavits saying, I saw. Well, I mean, it's your word against theirs. That's not going to stand up. A lot of these are not standing up in court. Some of them might, right? The Nevada thing, that might stand up in court, right? But at the end of the day, they don't win the election as a result. And that's the main thing, right? I think that Joe Biden won the U.S. presidential election. I think that there were some nefarious activities in a number of different places, but I think Joe Biden won the election. And that's the end of it. I mean, I just, and I'm sorry, when Rudy Giuliani was on TV saying there was a conspiracy involving Venezuela and China and George Soros and, oh my God, communist money and, oh my God, Canadian companies that he says are Venezuelan companies. And, oh my goodness, that was painful. That was painful to watch. I mean, he was sweating and people make fun of how much he was sweating. And maybe it's just the lights in the small space, but I also think, give me a break. I'm sorry. But really, if you look at it, what Rudy Giuliani did was he just took what the Democrats have done for the last 4 years and one-upped them, right? It's poker. It's like, oh, you're going to say Russia rigged the elections? Well, I'll say Venezuela, China, and George Soros rigged the elections. So there, take that, Democrats, right? For the next 4 years, we're going to pretend that the elections were rigged by other people. You say Russia rigged them? All right, we say Venezuela, China, and Soros rigged them. So there, Hugo Chavez from the grave rigged the elections. I mean, this is, and this is the thing, right? And the Democrats look a little bit hypocritical right now. I mean, don't deny it. For the last 4 years, they've said nothing but, oh no, Trump won because of Russia, Russian meddling, And so now Biden has won the election, and they are playing up, you know what? Oh my God, but, no one can question the elections ever. No one can question the elections. Well, you've been questioning the elections for 4 years. Look, I think Biden won this. Biden's going to be our next president. That's how it looks to me. Biden won. I really don't see how Trump can stay in power. I think Trump will leave office. Trump will never admit that he lost. Trump will maintain that he was the winner, and he'll maintain that for the next 4 years and probably run again in 2024. Who else do the Republicans have? But no, I don't think that whatever nefarious activities went on were enough to throw the election one way is enough to make the votes go the other way. Not buying it. So this is the thing, though. Why is it that in the Democratic camp, there's all this claim that no fraud has ever gone on ever? No, there's been plenty of electoral fraud in U.S. history. Does that mean that our election results are not legitimate? Of course not. That's not what it means. You know what I mean? It just means that, like any other country, we have problems in our voting system. Look, hey, if you want to criticize the U.S. election system, and I've said this before, there are some pretty blatant things in the U.S. election system that nobody dares to criticize that ought to be criticized. Thing number one that you want to criticize about the U.S. election system? How about the fact that Puerto Rico and Guam and the Virgin Islands and American Samoa and, the Northern Mariana Islands have zero say? Right? Now, would we tolerate that? What if Russia did that? What if Russia had an election and they said, you know what? Siberia gets no say. Sure, they're part of the Russian Federation, but if you live in Siberia, forget it. We would never tolerate that. They would say, oh my God, the Russians are disenfranchising those poor Siberians. This is an outrage. Oh, but, we do that every year, right? All those Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, we allow them to have no say in how they vote. Zero electoral votes, and no one says anything, and that's just totally fine. There are, hundreds of thousands of people who are U.S. citizens, born and living on U.S. soil, who have absolutely zero input into who our president is because they live in areas that we don't consider to be state-worthy, right? Well, that's an irregularity. That's not democratic. So that's number one. Number two, right? Every other country in the world, not every, I'm sure there's exceptions, but almost every other country, they either have the election on a weekend or they have the election on a national holiday. We in the United States, by law, mandate that our federal elections must happen on a working Tuesday. A working Tuesday, meaning that it cannot be a holiday. Cannot be a holiday. Must be on a Tuesday when people have to go to work. And so what is the result? In urban areas, you have big lines in the morning to vote before work, and you have big lines after work to get to the poll before the vote closes. Meanwhile, people in small towns don't have a problem. Meanwhile, people who don't have to work, like the wealthy, have no problem. But working class people who live in urban centers have a very hard time voting. Right now, here in New York, they had early voting. Right? They have mail-in ballots because of the pandemic, but having the election on a working Tuesday generally results in big, huge lines of people waiting in line for hours, worried about getting to work. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, that's not democratic. Then you throw into the fact that we, in our presidential election, have the Electoral College, which inflates the power of small states. Right? The vote of people living in small states that are not heavily populated is very inflated by the Electoral College. If you live in Connecticut, if you live in Idaho, your vote is worth way more than if you live in New York or if you live in California. On top of that, the states, they don't, aside from one or two states, the states don't divide up their electoral votes. So if you live in a state that is overwhelmingly Democratic, it doesn't matter, you can vote Republican all you want, but the state of California is going to go for the Democrats, right? If you live in Alabama, you can vote Democrat all you want, but everybody knows Alabama is going to go for the Republicans. So you are basically not represented in the final election results. If you are a liberal in a red state, if you are a conservative in a blue state, you just don't count. I mean, there's really no point in you even going to vote at that point, right? Because everyone knows your state is going to go one way. I mean, I live in New York, right? I live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn. If I were a Republican, it would not mean anything, right? Because everybody knows New York's votes are going to go to the Democrats. So, if I went and voted for Donald Trump, it would mean nothing. If I went and voted for Joe Biden, it would mean nothing. New York, everybody knows New York, Biden, end of discussion, right? Well, that means that I'm not being represented in the official results. So there's a huge number of ways that the U.S. election system is not democratic, right? And everyone just kind of looks the other way. The USA is the homeland of freedom and democracy. And if you disagree with that, you're an evil Russian bot, communist, sympathizer, Nazbol, Stalinist. And no one's allowed to listen to you. And this is how the game is played. Meanwhile, one irregularity in Bolivia proves that Evo Morales must be overthrown in a military coup. I mean, this is how the game is played. This is how the game is played, right? And it's a huge double standard. And what disturbs me the most is I see so many leftists that go along with this. The memo has been sent out among leftists now, that it's not that anyone who says voter fraud is a Trump fascist. I mean, it's like, no, I think that there was some fraud that went on. I just don't think Trump won. I don't think Trump won. I think that there was some nefarious activities that went on, but ultimately Biden won. Biden won, and that's not a result of fraud. I think Biden just won. That's what it looks like to me. Right? Now, if the Trump camp comes forward and shows a really strong case of fraud, okay, if all of the fraud claims by the Trump camp, if every single one of them is like 100% debunked, okay, but at the moment, the way it looks to me is, yes, there was some Democratic cheating, Trump still lost. That's how it looks to me, and that's what I'm sticking with until someone convinces me otherwise, right? That's what it looks like to me. That's based on the evidence that I have seen. It looks to me like, yes, there was probably some Democratic cheating, but it didn't really change the ultimate outcome, and Donald Trump still lost and Joe Biden won. And I'm not thrilled about that. I mean, but then again, I don't like Trump. So, I'm definitely, the person that I'm the most concerned about is Kamala Harris, right? Kamala Harris is a very very dangerous person, and I wrote an entire book about how dangerous Kamala Harris is. Attempted murder. Right? Kamala Harris withheld evidence in the hopes of killing an innocent man. There was a man on death row. There was DNA evidence. And she did her best to keep the DNA evidence from surfacing. She tried to suppress DNA evidence because she wanted to kill Kevin Cooper. That is attempted murder. If a prosecutor has evidence that could exonerate somebody and suppresses that evidence and fights against that evidence being admitted in court, that is called attempted murder. That is trying to kill somebody who could be innocent. And if that does not disturb you, that Kamala Harris is the kind of person who was so excited to kill someone, so excited by the thought that she could kill someone, that she suppressed evidence that could have exonerated them. I mean, if that doesn't bother you on some moral level, that if Kamala had gotten her way, if the governor of California had not overruled Kamala, if Kamala Harris had gotten her way, she would have taken an innocent man's life. An innocent man would have been killed by lethal injection. Kevin Cooper would be dead right now if Kamala Harris had gotten her way and the evidence had been suppressed. But she was overruled. She was overruled. The DNA evidence came forward, and Kevin Cooper was taken off of death row. If Kamala had gotten her way, a man would have been killed. Now, if that doesn't bother you on some level, that this is the woman who is going to be the vice president of the United States. This is a woman who was how can this not bother you? Kamala Harris is a very, very, very scary person. And I wrote a book delving into her psychology. I actually did a great interview with Paul LaRudy, who is a Bay Area Palestine activist. For years, he has marched for Palestine. And he talked about his interactions with Kamala Harris when she was the local attorney general in the Bay Area, when she first went to Israel, and how her career just took off after she visited Israel. Kamala Harris is a piece of work. I wrote a book, I studied Kamala Harris, and I used her to make a point about American politics and psychology and leftism and socialism and aesthetics and the world economy and the Hillary Clinton State Department and a lot of things. So check out my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. We need to know what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with a very, very, very dangerous person who is being handled by some very, very dangerous people, right? There are certain factions that have picked Kamala Harris, and the American people voted against her. Let's not forget that. The American people voted against Kamala Harris. Didn't matter. She is probably going to be the president after Joe Biden. Right? If Joe Biden makes it through these next 4 years, that will be nothing short of a miracle, and I don't think you can count on that. And that is really, really disturbing. I mean, she is a very, very, very scary person. Kamala Harris is a very, very scary person. And, read my book on her and spread the word. More people need to know about this. I mean, you can't tell me that her being female, her being not white, somehow trumps attempted murder. You can't tell me that. You can't tell me that, the fact that she tried to kill Kevin Cooper and tried to withhold evidence that could have exonerated Kevin Cooper, you cannot tell me that is overturned by the fact that she's a woman, by the fact that she's a woman of color, the fact that she's a Jamaican woman, the fact that she's an Indian woman, the fact that, that she's smart, she's strong. With Kamala, you can't go wrong. You cannot tell me that trying to kill an innocent man is something you can just overlook, right? It's actually interesting. Phil Oakes, the folk singer who wrote the song Here's to the State of Mississippi, right, which is a song about the Jim Crow segregation in Mississippi. And he said, when they smile and shrug their shoulders at the murder of a man, they smile and shrug their shoulders at the murder of a man. I mean, that is what's going on here when people say that Kamala Harris is somehow, oh, we should be proud of Kamala, she's great. No, I mean, you are smiling and shrugging your shoulders at the murder of a man. But anyway, I've spent way too much time on this. Keep the super chats rolling in, folks. I'll keep answering your questions. You are what makes this happen. All right. Kissinger. Does Kissinger want Biden to give détente 2.0? Well, look, Henry Kissinger, who was a very important advisor to the administration of Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger is so old at this point that I don't think he's got very much influence in American politics. But Henry Kissinger, he represents the Rockefellers. I mean, his relationship with the Rockefeller family was very well documented. I mean, they brought him up, they trained him. He was the Rockefellers' man in the Nixon administration, and then later with Gerald Ford and with Jimmy Carter. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was his rival, the two of them hated each other. They came from the same milieu, and they adopted ultimately the same strategy, which is that rather than having a direct confrontation with the communists, they altered U.S. strategy in the Cold War to the late Cold War strategy, where the USA manipulated China against the Soviet Union, where the United States manipulated Euro-communists in Western Europe against the Soviet Union, where the United States was able to get communists to kill communists in the Kampuchea War. Pol Pot was being backed by the CIA to invade Vietnam, and China ended up invading Vietnam to defend Cambodia, and you had thousands of communists killing other communists, and this was the strategy. And Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, they both, in one way or another, manipulated. That was their strategy, was no more the 1950s, America hates all communists, America must stand against all communists, but rather, strategic détente with the United States, cooling tensions with the Soviet Union while slipping its covert CIA manipulative hand into the communist movement and inciting communists against each other. That was the strategy. Look, a great example is the Iraq-Iran war, right? In Iran, you have the Shia Muslims, you have Khomeini, the revolution against capitalism, not capitalism, but Islam, war of poverty against wealth. You have the revolutionary religious Shia Muslim current. In Iraq, you have Ba'athist Arab socialism. And it was Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski that had the strategy of manipulating the Iranian Shia Muslim revolutionaries against the Ba'athist Arab socialists, right? And both sides killed each other. Thoughts on Biden's Secretary of State pick? Susan Rice, Biden. Right? Killed each other, right? And the Iraq-Iran war, in which the United States armed Saddam Hussein and armed the Ba'athist Arab socialist government, to unleash chemical weapons and kill Iraqis, kill Iranians. I mean, that effort by the United States, that, geopolitical maneuver of manipulating Ba'athist Arab socialists to kill Iranian revolutionaries and the Islamic revolutionaries was very, very effective. And it weakened Iran, and it weakened Iraq, and it weakened Iraq so much that eventually the United States could invade Iraq, and it cost millions of lives in Iran. It was very, 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 very evil, right? But this is Henry Kissinger, this is Zbigniew Brzezinski. This wouldn't have happened. The Truman administration would not have been smart enough to pull something like that off. I mean, it was years of CIA figuring out how to manipulate manipulate different forces around the world. These are the evil maneuvers of the imperialists, right? And this is the strategy. And a lot of what the Trump divide in the ruling class is that the Trump camp, they're more like the 1950s kind of thinking. They don't like this soft power stuff. They don't like the strategic geopolitical maneuvering. They want U.S. foreign policy to be about good versus evil. They don't like this kind of soft power manipulation. And we talk about that a lot on these lives, and I'm working on a book on that very topic, but it's very important to understand. Alrighty. All right, so someone said, what about mafia control of FBI and CIA? Well, here's the thing. What is the mafia, right? Mafia refers to organized crime from Italy, right? And I believe on the island of Sicily, there were organized crime units in Sicily that took care of people, that kind of played the role of, kind of being, organizations in Sicily, that worked on behalf of people then in the 1920s and 30s among Italian Americans, as they were very impoverished. There were a lot of Italian Americans who got in on the selling of illegal alcohol, because you have to remember during the 1920s and 30s, it was illegal to, alcohol was illegal in the United States. You had prohibition. And so there were a number of Italian Americans who were involved in the illegal alcohol trade. Al Capone was the most famous example. He ultimately went to prison, but he was the mafia boss of Chicago. But there were Irish mafia, right? I mean, the Kennedy family, they were involved in the illegal alcohol trade, back at that time. So that they were Irish. There was also Meyer Lansky. And he was Jewish, and he was, there was Jewish mafia as well. And that, working class communities, I mean, when they're poor in the Great Depression, you have people who, do, organized crime, organized criminal organizations spring up. So the person was asking about FBI and CIA. Well, it has been documented that after the Second World War, there was cooperation between the CIA and various organized crime units in Europe, mainly to work against the communist-controlled labor unions. There was a fear that communist labor unions in France and in Italy might be able to shut down the docks on behalf of the Soviet Union. So I guess the CIA worked with the mafia, with organized crime in Europe to fight against communist labor unions, right? And that there was some of that went on. So that's one thing that you might be referring to, and that also, I mean, there's, the FBI has a wing that is dedicated to going after organized crime, but many people wonder exactly how they do it and what's going on there. And, so, okay. Now, often when people reference mafia in the FBI and CIA, there's the term Mormon mafia that gets thrown out there. And it's widely alleged that there is nepotism within the FBI and CIA for members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, right? That Utah is very much Salt Lake City is the head of the Mormon Church, and Mitt Romney is a member of Congress, a U.S. Senator, and that there is a Mormon axis within the FBI and CIA. The organizations are not controlled by the Mormons, but the Mormons have a lot of influence within the group, right? They are a hugely influential lobby, right? You'll remember that when Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, in Utah, the Mormon Church ran their own candidate, Evan McMullin. And Evan McMullin is a famous CIA-linked intellectual who lives in Salt Lake City, and he's a Mormon. He doesn't approve of Donald Trump. You'll remember that Mitt Romney was the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump. And Mitt Romney is a Mormon, is very outspoken being a Mormon. So the Mormon Church, the Mormon Access, Glenn Beck, right, the conservative radio host, has converted to Mormonism. And that, Glenn Beck, Mitt Romney, FBI, CIA, they, the right wing, at least of the CIA, but, FBI, James Comey, Glenn Beck, Mitt Romney, they kind of have a similar position on Trump, which is they zig and zag. Sometimes they like Trump, sometimes they don't. It seems like lately they don't, but you'll remember, it's complicated. But yeah, that is an axis within the American deep state. It's actually very similar to in ancient Rome. They had what they called mystery cults, right? That within the Roman government apparatus, right? Rome was they believed in many gods, right? It was polytheist, but certain gods were worshipped by people in certain professions, right? Certain divisions of the army had their special god, right? And they had special elaborate rituals that went with worshiping that special god, right? I believe the Roman Navy, right? They worshipped the god of the ocean, and they had special ceremonies and special prayers they recited to worship the god of the ocean, right? And this was called the mystery cults, right? I believe there was the cult of Mithra, right? And that Mormonism is it started out as kind of a strange, fringe, religion. It started in the 1800s in the United States. Joseph Smith claimed he was visited by God. Was visited by an angel and given a book of golden plates. Joseph Smith, you've seen the South Park. Joseph Smith was called a prophet. Dum 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 dum. I mean, it's not exactly right, but right, it's a religion that starts in the 1800s. It's a very strange religion. Joseph Smith claims to be a prophet of God. He's discovered that actually Native Americans are actually Jews, and that Jesus, led a group of Jews to live in the United States, and then they were all killed. And it's a very strange, very, very strange, very, very strange religious group that started out in the United States, and they believed in polygamy. They believed that a man could have more than one wife. Here in the United States, we don't take too kindly to that. We don't take too kindly to men having more than one wife. So everywhere they went, it would come out they were having more than one wife, and they would get driven out. They were first in New England, then they got sent to Ohio, then they got sent to Illinois, and in Illinois, a mob of people killed Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith was killed. Then Joseph Smith's successor was Brigham Young, and Brigham Young went out to Salt Lake City and established New Zion, and they called Salt Lake City New Zion. Salt Lake City was New Zion, and then, the Army, as, the USA was expanding out to Utah, the U.S. military showed up and sent troops to Salt Lake City, and there was a military confrontation between the U.S. government and the Mormons. And the Mormons, at the point of a gun, were told that they had to, not have polygamy anymore. So the Mormons said, oh, no, we don't have polygamy anymore. The only Mormons that do that now are what they call fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, which is a very fringe thing, and there's not many of them. And the official Mormon church has abandoned polygamy. They were still kind of seen as weirdos, right? Until, all up the 1800s, 1900s, they were seen as weirdos. It wasn't really until the 1950s they started to be taken seriously in American politics. The 1950s, they discovered that Mormons really hate communism. So Mormons started joining right-wing anti-communist groups like the John Birch Society, and they started, tracking communists and keeping track of communists and stuff, and demonstrating how anti-communist they were. In about the 1970s, all of a sudden, their missionary work really expanded, and they started, doing a lot of missionary work in a lot of countries around the world, which is very interesting. And their membership really expanded, and Mormonism, started to expand, and now FBI and CIA have a lot of Mormons in them. Very long, complicated process. But a lot of people have pointed out the reason that there's a lot of FBI and CIA Mormons is Mormons don't drink alcohol. Mormons don't swear. Mormons, are very, they're all American, right? They're every, you think about Mitt Romney, right? He looks like a Ken Barbie doll, right? The kid's Barbie doll. You got Barbie and Ken. He looks like Ken. He's like the ideal, Mitt Romney, you look at him, he's just like everyone's image of like a wholesome, good American man, right? Right? he was debating Barack Obama, and he's like, I like PBS. I like Big Bird, but do we need to borrow from China to pay for it? He was hokey 1950s man. Gee golly, I don't swear, I don't drink alcohol, I'm just an upstanding citizen. They really, if you're a Mormon, you are expected to, they wear suits all the time, and they comb their hair perfectly, and they, knock on your door and try to get you to convert to Mormonism. And, they're very, very clean cut, the term in Washington, D.C., I think the term is Boy Scout, right? If you're somebody who just, Dudley do right, do everything nice, kind of this, if you're a good, a good conservative, clean cut, never does anything wrong, people kind of make fun of you in Washington, D.C., right? And they call you a Boy Scout. And the Mormons are Boy Scouts, right? And Boy Scouts are like the ideal that the FBI and CIA want. Namely, because if you're Dudley Do Right, it's very hard to blackmail you, right? It's very hard to manipulate you. And they just live a very conservative life, and they have also a lot of black and white thinking, right? That the Mormon Church very much promotes. You're either with us or against us. There's good in the world. There's bad. And on top of that, Mormonism in a weird way is very similar to like the Church of England, right? I don't know if folks are familiar with the Church of England, but the Church of England is a Christian church, right? But it has some beliefs that don't really get discussed much anymore. I don't know if people know William Blake's very famous poem, Jerusalem. And did those feet, I won't sing it, and did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? And did the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon these clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spears, O crowd, unfold. Bring me my chariots of fire. I shall not cease from men till strife, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. That's William Blake. What is that referring to? Well, it was believed at one point, I don't know if they believe this anymore, by the Church of England. It was believed that Jesus Christ, before he got crucified, he took a hike up through Europe and started hanging out in Britain. And I think he drank from the Holy Grail or something. That Jesus Christ walked on England's shores and blessed England to make England the world empire. That's nuts, right? It didn't happen, right? I mean, the idea of Jesus Christ going all the way, not just through Europe, all the way, then crossing the English Channel, getting to England, and then ordaining England to rule over the world is outrageous. But it was believed. I don't think the Church of England believes this anymore, but they did believe it at one point, right? And it was on that basis that, that they argued England was destined to be the British Empire, to rule over the world. Well, Mormons believe the same thing about the United States, right? Mormons believe that Jesus Christ ascended into heaven, and then a group of Israelites got on a boat and went to the United States, and then Jesus, did a second coming on earth with, and hung out with the Israelites and the prophet Mormon in the United States. And thus, Mormonism teaches that the United States is destined to rule the world, that the United States, should rule the world. It is ordained by God to rule over the world because Jesus showed up in the United States. Well, Jesus never went to Britain. Jesus never went to the United States. But that's what Mormons believe. So it is also a very good religion for FBI and CIA, right? Not only are they clean cut, they don't drink, they don't swear, they don't do anything bad. On top of that, they believe that the United States is destined to rule over the world. And they very much believe the United States must rule, right? And it's a little bit strange, right? At the same time that they believe the United States must rule over the world, they do have a weird blood oath against the American government, right? The American government, let's remember, had a shootout and killed a bunch of their people and killed Joseph Smith. So it's very complicated. The Mormons kind of hate the American government, but they also believe that the United States should rule the entire world. It's a very confused thing, and their beliefs are not for public consumption largely, right? It's not like, with any other religion, you can find out what they believe. Mormonism is a little bit more like you learn more as you get involved in it, and after you've been baptized, after you can learn more, right? And the beliefs are, you learn gradually over the course of being a Mormon. It's kind of like Freemasonry. It's kind of like Scientology, where you learn more of their beliefs as you go along, right? They don't, I've often pointed out, if a Mormon knocks on your door, knock, 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 I'm from the Book of Mormon, start asking them about golden plates, they're not going to talk to you about it. Start asking them about, Joseph Smith, and they're not going to talk to you about it. They're not going to talk to you about it. The Mormon selling point is we're a great church. We believe in family. We're a great community. A lot of great business people are in our church. A lot of politicians are in our church. They're not going to talk to you about that stuff. You're not supposed to learn that stuff until they've already kind of got you in, and you learn it more and more and more until the time that you finally, learn it all at the time you've been baptized. And, that's how it works. You're not supposed to know what they really believe, right? And that's how these things work. And anyway, so is there a Mormon? I wouldn't use the term mafia to describe it. Mafia refers to organized crime. Is there nepotism for the Mormons within the FBI and CIA? It looks that way to me. Is there a wing of the FBI and CIA that is in line with Salt Lake City? I would say so. If you look at representatives of the Mormon Church, if you look at figures like Mitt Romney and Glenn Beck, if you look at the way James Comey, his relationship with Trump off and on up until he got fired, it seems like that there is a particular axis within the United States that moves in that direction. I mean, it's also a big economic axis. There's a lot of businesses. I mean, they own a lot of things, right? They are an economic entity as well. So that's the Mormons, right? And yeah, a lot of influence within FBI and CIA. Thailand. Not ready to speak on Thailand. You guys are really anxious to hear about Thailand. I will give you an answer when I'm ready to give you an answer about Thailand. I'm just not there yet. Not ready to talk about Thailand yet. But thanks for asking. All right. Oh, it's getting late. All righty. Socialism with American characteristics. How will it be different? Well, one of the major differences about socialism with American characteristics is the United States is already developed. All the countries that have adopted socialism in the past have been countries that have been underdeveloped and undeveloped because of capitalism, right? Imperialism has kept countries poor. They've had to break free from American imperialism and Western capitalism in order to start developing their economies. The United States is already developed, so that'll be a difference. The other thing is that I think that, the American people, we have a very entrepreneurial side to us. We want to work hard and get ahead. So I can't imagine that there wouldn't be a big market sector in an American socialist society. I think there would just have to be, by necessity. There would just have to be a big market sector. What else? I can't imagine the U.S. public ever accepting a socialism that didn't have, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. I can imagine that would be enshrined. But at the end of the day, socialism with American characteristics will be something that develops over the course of struggle. It's not something that will be created because I declare it. It's something. This is what Destiny couldn't seem to wrap his mind around when I debated him, is that socialism does not come from the mind of a man, right? Socialism emerges in the course of the class struggle, right? And as the American people rise up and fight for their rights against the big corporations and big monopolies, they are going to gradually force, and develop a socialism that they are willing to fight for. And it's not going to be based on a blueprint somebody drew up. It's going to be over the course of struggle, what they believe in, what they fight for, right? And it will take a unique character to address the contradictions in the society at the time that we're living, right? That socialism in the United States will be a remedy to address the contradictions of U.S. society at the time in which it emerges. So that's what you have to remember. All right. Did I see the movies Death of Stalin and Downfall? I've never seen Downfall, and I've never seen Death of Stalin. I don't know what Downfall is about. I didn't see Death of Stalin for this reason. There are an endless amount of unverifiable personal anecdotes about Stalin. Nobody knows if these things are true. There's a million of these little anecdotes about Stalin. That's based on somebody gave an interview and said, well, Stalin said this to me, or Stalin said that. There's no way to know if it's true or not. I mean, the same with Mao. There's a book called The Private Life of Chairman Mao. It's based on one man who claimed to have been Mao's doctor saying all these awful things about Mao. Is it true? Well, it's one guy's word. He said it, right? It's not verifiable. And it says all kinds of awful things about Mao. And like you hear all kinds of things, right? Stalin supposedly said to Winston Churchill, the death of one is a tragedy. The death of a million is just a statistic. Well, when did he say that? We don't know, right? Did he even say it? I don't know. Winston Churchill says he says it. Winston Churchill apparently also has an anecdote where he said to, he said to Stalin, how many million people, how many people have died in the famine in Ukraine? And he like put up his hands like this, and that meant 10 million. I mean, it's like, it gets to be so ridiculous, right? There's no way to verify this, but you get one person to say one thing, one little anecdote, and it gets republished, and there's a lot of them that are really, really ugly. And the thing is, what you don't realize is Stalin, right? There's just as many good anecdotes, right? Stalin is wildly popular in Russia right now, right? I mean, 53% of the population think he was good for their country. So, and at the time Stalin was alive, there were all kinds of crazy myths and legends about what a great guy he was. But do any of those get published in American books? No. And they're just as verifiable, right? I mean, I'm not saying that these stories about these personal anecdotes about Stalin are not true. I'm not saying that. But I'm not saying that the other personal anecdotes, there's a million personal anecdotes where Stalin's good. They don't publish those. And there's a million personal anecdotes where Stalin is this cruel, heartless person. And I mean, they could be true. I don't know. But I have very little tolerance for the way that Stalin and Mao are portrayed at Barnes and Noble is so over the top and ridiculous. And it's just so, like these people did nothing good in their lives, and they were pedophiles, and they were murderers, and they laughed as they snuffed out the life of innocent children. And it's so over the top, right? I mean, it's like, and the source of the personal stuff. I'm not talking about events in Ukraine, not talking about the Moscow trials and the Great Terror. I'm talking about the personal stuff. The personal stuff. The sources of the personal stuff is somebody said I saw. Well, who knows? It's not verifiable, but they paint a picture and of this person, as being just the most evil caricature ever. And it's all based on somebody here saw, Well, I'm interested in what went on in Ukraine, and I'm interested in what went on in the Great Terror. I'm not interested in Stalin was so evil that he laughed about the death of his own son maniacally. I don't want to hear that. I mean, who knows if it's true or not? But if it was something that showed Stalin in a good light, they wouldn't show it. If it was something that showed Stalin in a bad light, even if it's completely unverified, they'll say it. There's a book, Mao, The Unknown Story. You can buy it. It's widely circulated in the United States. It makes over-the-top, crazy allegations about Mao Zedong with no evidence. One of the things it claims is that one of the most epic, important battles of the Chinese Revolution never happened. It claims that this battle, on this bridge where the Chinese soldiers were crossing the bridge as they're being shot at, that it never happened. What is her source? That's like a big deal, right? Imagine if someone said the Battle of the Alamo never happened. Imagine if somebody said that, the Battle of Gettysburg never happened. Well, one of the most important battles in Chinese history, this book that is widely circulated in the United States says never happened. Based on what? Based on she talked to somebody. There was a woman who sold noodles, and she talked to her, and she said the battle never happened. What does that mean? Right? Or there's some documents that only she has, only the author had. You can't do that. I'm sorry. If I were to write a book and say the Battle of the Alamo never happened, the Battle of Gettysburg never happened, the Battle of Lexington and Concord never happened, I would have a big burden of proof. But if you decide that Mao is Satan, right? Mao is Satan, and so you write this book, you write this book, and then immediately what happens is if you say, hey, how are you sure that this battle never happened? They go, what, are you defending Mao, the mass murderer? And so, you just shut up. And this is how they do this. They create this. And so you get these books that you buy at Barnes & Noble, and they portray a picture of Stalin and a picture of Mao, and a picture that is so over the top. So over the top. And it's so biased in what they choose to put in and what they choose not to put in. And it's based on every negative I was there I saw, leaving out every positive I was there I saw. And you just get this caricature. So like the movie The Death of Stalin, it's about evil tyrant Stalin dies. It looked to me almost like the way it was being advertised, it looked to me like kind of like there's an old Russian comedy that was very famous called The Inspector General, right? And it's about like these local, this local village. There's going to be an undercover inspector general come and visit the village. And there's some guy who shows up who's not the inspector general, but they all think he's the inspector general. So they start like buttering him up and treating him really well. And it's supposed to be a comedy about Russian bureaucracy. And, I mean, it's a classic comedy from Russian history, The Inspector General. I saw, the advertisements for The Death of Stalin. It looked to me like this was supposed to be a comedy, and it was kind of like a more modern version, of kind of the Inspector General. Like the dictator has died, and watch the bureaucrats go bumbling, through it. And maybe it's funny in some points, but at the end of the day, like it's premised on, this Barnes and Noble caricature of Stalin as somebody. And I'm sorry, but I mean, I don't know. I never met Stalin personally. And I mean, is it possible that Stalin did a lot of evil, bad things? Of course, right? I don't rule that out. I don't deny that a lot of people who shouldn't have been in gulags ended up in gulags. I don't deny that a lot of, that there was definitely some mismanagement and there was a famine and a lot of people died. And, I'm not denying that. But, Stalin took one of the poorest countries in the world. I mean, Russia was an agrarian, impoverished country. He made it an industrial superpower. He defeated the Nazis, okay? He mobilized the country to rapidly industrialize. You can't pretend that, yeah, Barnes and Noble displays Mein Kampf prominently. Yeah, you can't pretend that Stalin, regardless of whether he, maybe it happened despite him, right? You can't deny that as a result of the Soviet Union's existence and the Soviet Union and the 5-year economic plans, that a lot of really good things happened in the world. You can't deny that. But of course, we have this narrative that we're spoon-fed in the United States. No. Nothing good ever happened. Everyone was just poor and starving and miserable throughout the entire Soviet existence. And it's like, no, I mean, a lot of people really benefited from the Soviet Union, right? They did as a result of the Soviet Union at the time when Stalin was in charge of it. Lots of very, very, very good things happened, like the civil rights movement in the United States. Like the Popular Front against fascism globally, like whole, illiteracy being wiped out in the Soviet Union, like the whole country being industrialized. You can't, look at, the films of the Soviet Union. They were doing, moves in ballet that had never been done before. They were leading the world in gymnastics. Women were becoming electrical engineers, and they had some of the biggest power plants in the world. You can't deny that a lot of very, very, very good things happened for millions of people, not just in Russia and the surrounding countries, but also all over the world as a result of the Soviet Union existing. Okay? And that gets completely obscured by this, Stalin was this caricature satanic villain. And I just have no tolerance. I don't want to hear that. It makes me angry, right? I want a book to come out about Richard Nixon like that, right? Richard Nixon. I want a book about Ronald Reagan to come out about that, right? Ronald Reagan, how many millions of people, right? Ronald Reagan, he funded the Contra War in Nicaragua, right, that killed hundreds of thousands of Nicaraguans. He armed and trained Osama bin Laden to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. He bombed Libya and killed people in Libya. He gave weapons to Saddam Hussein to use chemical weapons against the Iranians. I want a movie to come out about the evil Ronald Reagan, where we hear every evil anecdote about Ronald Reagan. I want a book about how Ronald Reagan sits in front of the globe and laughs. Ha 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 ha! I will kill the Nicaraguans because I am evil. I want a book to come out. That gives Ronald Reagan the same treatment that every Barnes and Noble piece of crap book gives Stalin and Mao. And then I'll be interested in hearing both sides. All right? When there's a book that comes out about Lyndon Johnson and his evil Vietnam War and portrays Lyndon Johnson the same way that Stalin and Mao are portrayed, and the millions of people killed in Vietnam, then I'll read your book, I'll watch The Death of Stalin. But until then, I'm not interested in it. I'm really not interested in it because it's completely unfair. It is completely unfair. And it's not just, look, it's like it is the Proud Boy thing. The West is the best, right? Napoleon killed millions of people, right? Napoleonic Wars, He invades Europe. I mean, Napoleon was a brutal murderer. But if somebody in France says, you know what, I don't like the bad things that Napoleon did, I don't like the bad things that Napoleon did, but I admire Napoleon as a great statesman, as a founder of modern France, everyone's fine with that. If you say, you know what, I admit Napoleon did a lot of bad things, but I look up to him as a positive force in French history, everyone goes, oh, that's okay, right? If a British person says, you know what, I admire Winston Churchill. Sure, Winston Churchill did a lot of bad things, like, using chemical weapons against the Iraqis when they revolted and starving millions of Indians to death. And, sure, Winston Churchill was bad, but, Winston Churchill, he defeated the Nazis, good speaker, important statesman. I admire Winston Churchill. Nobody condemns them. Nobody condemns them, right? But if you say, you know what, me like Stalin, oh my God. If you say, I like Mao, right? If you say, I like Fidel Castro, right? Napoleon was a mass murderer. Winston Churchill was a mass murderer. Ronald Reagan was a mass murderer, right? But the West is the best, right? The West is the best. And you're allowed, it's totally fine to like Winston Churchill, totally fine to like Ronald Reagan, totally fine to like Napoleon. But if you admire a communist, oh no, right? I'm sick of this. I am totally sick of this. And I'm sick of that's why I have no interest in watching the death of Stalin. Because it's not fair. It is not fair, right? There is this huge moral outrage if you so much as say, Stalin industrialized the USSR. You're an evil tanky. You're denying the millions of people he killed. How dare you? You're the same as a Holocaust denier. There's this whole big outrage if you dare admit that anything good ever happened because of a decision that Stalin or Mao made. But it's totally fine to love all the mass murdering, vicious... Look, folks, the Democratic Party, the biggest party in the United States, the largest political party in the United States, the Democratic Party. Every year, all over the country, they have Jackson Day celebrations. Jackson Day. Who is Andrew Jackson? Andrew Jackson committed ethnic cleansing. He committed genocide. Andrew Jackson was president of the United States, and he decided that he did not want any Native Americans east of the Mississippi River. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that. You can't do that. That's not constitutional. And he very famously said, well, the Supreme Court can enforce that. And with the U.S. military, he forcibly deported all Native Americans west. Trail of Tears, the removal, genocide. Genocide. He's on our $20 bills. There's no moral outrage. Does Vosh throw a temper tantrum at anyone who's ever been to a Democratic celebration? I want to see Vosh, right? He's so outraged by Nazbols and tankies. Oh, I want to see him scream and yell and have a tantrum at anybody who has a $20 bill in their pocket. But it's so ridiculous. You're not allowed to admire Stalin. You're not allowed to admire Mao. You're not allowed to admire Fidel Castro. You definitely can't admire Hugo Chavez. You can't admire anybody that CNN and your high school history book told you was bad. But people that were mass murderers and killers, well documentedly for Western capitalism, Andrew Jackson made mistakes. Andrew Jackson made mistakes. Winston Churchill, yeah, I guess he made mistakes. No, I'm so sick of this, right? I'm sick of hearing it from leftists, too. Socialists and communists should know better than this, right? I don't care if you're not an ML, if you don't agree with me, but if you're somebody who's supposed to be anti-imperialist, if you're supposed to be against Western capitalism, you should know better than this kind of nonsense. You should know better than this. You should know better than this, right? I'm tired of this huge double standard, this West is the best narrative. I'm sick of it. I'm really, really tired of it. It's really, really, really annoying to me. And I'm sick of it. And I'm sick of the over the top demonization of anti-imperialist and socialist leaders, and the open admiration for brutal murderers from the West. You know, I think there are things that we can learn from Western leaders who were very awful. I think there are things we can learn from communist leaders that made mistakes and were very awful. Okay? I think that we can learn from all of them. Right? I don't celebrate Thanksgiving because I think that what happened to the Native Americans was good. What the Puritan settlers did was wrong. I don't do that. It was right. I don't do that, right? I don't celebrate Thanksgiving because I celebrate the genocide of Native people. I celebrate Thanksgiving because it's a nice day to sit there and eat some turkey with my family. You know? And no one shames me for it. No one tells me that I'm, evil. But at the same time, if I can celebrate Thanksgiving, why can't I, admit that socialism in the Soviet Union did some good things, right? I'm sick and tired of the double standard. I've hammered this point home, so I guess we'll just move on. But yeah, I mean, I'm just tired of this. I'm really, really, really tired of this. And the fact that leftists, that socialists repeat this garbage, right? Socialists are all about shaming anyone who loves Stalin. I mean, give me a break, right? I mean, if you're allowed to love Winston Churchill, you're allowed to love Ronald Reagan, you're allowed to love Andrew Jackson, then you're allowed to love Stalin. And then when you're arguing with them, love this, they'll immediately go, "Oh yeah, F Andrew Jackson. Oh yeah, F Stalin." That's just for the argument, right? That's just for the argument. That is just for the argument. Right? "Oh yeah, I hate Andrew Jackson too." They'll say that. But then, 2 lives later, it's vote for Biden or else you're a Nazi. So they don't really mean it. But for the sake of the argument, they'll concede Andrew Jackson and just try to make it an argument about Stalin. No, they don't actually hold that standard. Right? And I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this Proud Boy crap in left-wing circles. Right? The Proud Boys, the West is the best. That's what Vosh believes. That's what all these thought slime, that's all, they're Proud Boys. They're left Proud Boys is what they are. Anti-tankyism is left-wing Proud Boyism. West is the best. That's what they believe. That's what they believe. They are left-wing Proud Boys. That's what they believe. That's what they believe. They are left-wing Proud Boys. They think West is the best, right? And they're not anti-imperialists. Anyway. Got me going there. But you all like it when I get passionate. So there you go. Should MLs wish for imperialist countries to collapse? No. No, they should not. No, they should not. You shouldn't wish for any country to collapse. Right? You should not wish for any country to collapse. If you are a socialist, if you're a Marxist, you believe in wanting to make life better for working people, you should not want any country to collapse. Countries collapsing results in lots of suffering for lots of working people. So you don't want that. Now, you may want the imperialist countries to adopt socialism. You may want them to have revolutions. Maybe you want their imperialism to be weakened. 1936 Constitution. But you don't want countries to collapse, right? Countries collapsing means lots of people don't have food, lots of people don't have running water, the mail doesn't get delivered, there's chaos in the streets, there's competing factions, there's people killing other people. You don't want countries to collapse. Look, you can hate American capitalism. You can hate American imperialism, but you don't want American capitalism to collapse. You want the United States to move away from imperialism and colonialism. So no, out of basic human solidarity, no socialist, no revolutionary wants any country to collapse. Right? Out of basic human solidarity, those of us who are socialists, those of us who are revolutionaries, we don't want countries to collapse. We want countries to change. Right? We favor a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. Right? No. So that, yeah. I mean, that's. I'm sorry, I tell people I'm not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. No socialist wants any country to collapse. When countries collapse, that results in huge amounts of mass suffering. And you don't want that. That was easy. what do you think of Biden's Secretary of State, Susan Rice? Well, not a big fan. She spread the lie during the Libyan war. She spread the lie that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra so his soldiers could rape women, and that was later turned out to be false. She was a huge advocate of U.S. military intervention in Libya. She was spreading all kinds of falsehoods to try and justify U.S. military interventionism in Libya and elsewhere. She's a foreign policy hawk, and she's not good. I don't like her. Not a big fan. She was part of the Samantha Power, Hillary Clinton State Department apparatus, and she's not good. I mean, she lied to get us into wars. She's an imperialist. Yeah. But you're not supposed to pay attention to that. No, just pay attention to the fact that she's a woman of color, right? And that's so empowering, right? And I'm probably racist for what I just said here, right? And think of all the young girls who can now grow up to, and this is how sad left-wing politics has gotten, right? And she's spreading revolution around the world. Oh, read my book on Kamala Harris. I talk about Samantha Power in there. I talk about Anne Marie Slaughter. I talk about Amy Klobuchar. I talk about Jared Andrew Cohen. There's an apparatus within the American government. There's a destructive axis that is doing lots of bad things. Susan Rice is not good. I think she would have been better than Kamala Harris, honestly. We would be much safer if she were the VP than if Kamala was the VP, honestly. She doesn't strike me as crazy. And her background, her history, she has a much better record, I think. All right. Most hardline party in power right now, okay? I've learned a lot in a short amount of time. Which journalists are the biggest influences on you and your work? Keep up the great work. All right. So, hardline party and journalists' influence. Alrighty. Okay. All right. So the next question was the 1936 Constitution of the Soviet Union. In 1936, the Soviet Union adopted a new constitution. That 1936 Constitution was, that Constitution was kind of the model for socialist countries from there forward, right? 1936, the USSR's new constitution said they were a fully socialist country. They were fully socialist, and there was a whole kind of discussion in the country, kind of a referendum. The book, there's the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union short course. It ends with the 1936 Constitution. The adoption of the 1936 Constitution was a big deal. Stalin, it was a very big deal in the Stalin years, that the adoption of that Constitution. It was the Stalin Constitution, basically. It was seen as a big turning point. They said the USSR was fully socialist. It had a House of Soviet of nationalities, I believe. So every nationality was represented. In addition to the Supreme Soviet of the population. It was a big deal. And there was widespread discussion in the country. I think there were many different proposals that were put forward. The main criticism of that constitution is that it says the USSR was fully socialist and moving toward communism. And the Trotskyites objected to that. The Trotskyites said the USSR couldn't be socialist because it was not, socialism comes after capitalism, and the USSR had been, had not been fully capitalist at the time of its revolutions. The Trotskyites really hated the 1936 Constitution. I think that it's fair to say the USSR was fully socialist in 1936. I think that, unfortunately, in the 1950s, I've read some stuff that the USSR said where they were saying that they were moving toward communism. They were in the early stages of communism, and that was clearly not true. But for the 1936 Constitution of the USSR saying that that the USSR was a fully socialist country. At that point, it was 91% state ownership. They had industrialized very rapidly. I would say the USSR was a fully socialist country in 1936. It's an interesting document. That's all I can say about the 1936 Constitution. What do you want to know about it? I will say that Constitution was kind of the model for the Constitution of North Korea, the Constitution of, various countries, that adopted socialism. It was kind of inspired by that constitution. That kind of became, it was a widely studied document. You talk about, during the Cold War, the form of socialism that existed, people call it really existing socialism. People call it really existing socialism. What's another name for it? They call it Stalinism. They call it, I think in German they call it real socialism. And, that was, one party state. You have a very charismatic leader. You have 5-year economic plans. You have almost all the economy nationalized. You have Stakhanovism, where you're rewarding people for working very hard. The leader goes around and visits factories and handing out rewards basically all the time for people who work very, very hard to build the country. The population is constantly becoming mobilized to build. It had great victories. I mean, that's the system that defeated the Nazis. That's the system that, it conquered outer space. That's the system that raised Cuba up from poverty and made Cuba a country that, for a small Caribbean island, is loved all over the world for its healthcare system. And, that system, what you can call, Cold War socialism, had its strengths. It also has its weaknesses, and I've talked about that in videos, and it's never going to return. Right? Most socialist countries in the world are adopting an economic system much like China's, much like Vietnam's. So I don't think that the 1936 Constitution and that style of socialism is ever going to return. I think it has some real flaws, but it had some strength at the time, and it was. No one had ever done it before. No one had ever built a socialist society, you have to remember. And they were building it under very hostile circumstances, surrounded by imperialism, under attack, an underdeveloped country. And what they got, in a lot of ways, really existing socialism was a synthesis between the most radical revolutionary ideas of the Bolsheviks and the very deeply conservative ideas of the Russian population, right? And that there were some aspects of really existing socialism that were deeply conservative and deeply influenced by feudalism. The cult of personality that first around Lenin and around Stalin very much mimicked the czars, the way the czars were kind of at the center of life. They were like the figures that were the center of the state. There was, the kind of religious mobilization of the population where you had the Communist Party kind of, giving people an ideology and a cause to believe in that kind of mimicked the role the Russian Orthodox Church played in Soviet Russia or in pre-Soviet Russia. There were, there were aspects of really existing socialism that did kind of mimic feudalism. So it's a mix, right? And the countries that were very, very impoverished and underdeveloped and feudal at the time they have a socialist revolution, they will often, they have to have a system that will work, right? And it can't just be whatever the revolutionary leaders want. It has to be what the population is willing to accept. It's a compromise, right? That's generally how these things work. It's a synthesis, right? And that, really existing socialism in the USSR was a synthesis, I think. Okay. What's the most hardliner party in the world? Well, first of all, right, we need to make clear that being a hardliner is not necessarily a good thing, right? It's not necessarily a good thing. Hardliner can mean you're stuck in your ways, that you won't change, right? So, hardliner, yeah, it means you're more committed to socialist, communist ideals. But it can also mean that, you're a little bit stuck in your ways. So I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing. But probably the country that has the ruling party that is the most, thoroughly anti-imperialist, I would say is probably North Korea, simply because of the fact that North Korea is still technically at war with the United States. North Korea has been fighting for its life, and especially in the 1990s during the arduous march when millions of people starved to death. They've had a really hard time. And because of that, their party is very, very, very anti-imperialist and very, very anti-capitalist and very, very thoroughly Marxist. That's not necessarily a good thing, right? Because, socialism needs to be able to adapt and change. But because of the situation North Korea has been in for the last 50 years, with half the Korean peninsula still, divided, with U.S. troops right on their border, I think that probably the party that is the most fanatical and the most anti-imperialist in the world is probably the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So I don't want to repeat myself too long. What journalists influence my work? Well, I think the folks at Gray Zone do great work. I mean, they're doing great work. Gray Zone Project does great stuff. I've also, I in terms of journalists historically, I love Anna Louise Strong. Great writer, Anna Louise Strong, amazing writer. Um, Edgar Snow. I really like Edgar Snow's writing about China. Very, very good stuff. Um, there's a lot of very good journalists throughout the years who have reported on socialism and what it's been like. I like their work. Who else? Yeah, Agnes Smedley. She did some good journalism. Who else? There's a lot of folks who've done some good writing over the years that you can learn from. Um, you know, and I work in anti-imperialist media. I think it's really an honor to be able to tell the truth about the crimes of American imperialism and not repeat the lies of the Pentagon in the work that I do. And I have a lot of colleagues who do a lot of really good work as well that are worth checking out. People who work with me. So yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, folks. Any other questions before we wrap this up? Any other questions before we go? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Last call. Last call. Last call. Anybody else? Anybody else? Any other super chat questions before we wrap this up? Anything else, folks? Last call. Anything else? Anything else? Well, I guess not. I guess there isn't anything else. So on that note, folks, I will end the way we always end. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Revolutionary music, hey, there's lots of it out there. Lots of great revolutionary music out there. Woody Guthrie, right? That's good stuff. Caleb, advice for building socialism in my community. Having communist meetings. Well, I actually made a video how to have a communist meeting. There are 3 ways to have a communist meeting. The first would be to have a study meeting where you read a text and discuss it, and you go around and discuss it. The second would be to have a public meeting where you have speeches and music and all of that. And the third would be to have a street meeting where you're on the street agitating. So check out my video, How to Have a Communist Meeting. In terms of communist music, there's a lot of good communist music, revolutionary music out there. I mean, there's Black freedom struggle music that's really amazing. There's music, there's great revolutionary music from Latin America. There's the song El Pueblo Unido Jamás será vencido, right? Or, the people united will never be defeated. Stand up and fight, for victory will come. A new light is shining, and that's good stuff, right? Victor Jara of Chile is mentioned, right? There's a lot of good Chinese music, right? Right? Without the communists, there'd be no new China. Without communists, there'd be no new China. Without the Communist Party, there would be no China, no new China, right? Those are some beautiful songs from the Chinese Revolution, right? There's, the Golden Mountain in Beijing. There's, The East is Red. I mean, that music is really, really powerful stuff. Right? There's all kinds of great revolutionary music out there. So, yeah, I would recommend checking out some of the music. Anyway, folks, I'm glad that you asked those last 2 super chats. I'm glad I could give you an answer. And on that note, folks, we will wrap this up. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night, folks. Good night.